Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Night Sky. So, this is the pilot episode, but I'm going to talk about certain things from this season, little bits here and there. Hopefully, not giving too much away, but I'm just going to talk about kind of like little bits of the season. I didn't watch the whole entire season, but like I've seen quite a bit of episodes just because on the one day that I was to go on and not be able to record anything, I caught some things of the show. So, Night Sky. So, this is one of those shows where you want to try to put the pieces together and just be like, what the is going on in this show? It's kind of one of those where you're wanting to figure out, like, and want all the answers, and they never really give you all the answers within one episode or whichever. So, it's like, it's not even like really a build of like of them kind of spoon feeding you this answer or that like no, you want to just go on and just like, man, I want to figure everything out right now. But like, again, it's one of those building things. So for this show, we have Franklin and Irene. They're going through their better years, and we have both of these characters who are to have, one way or the other, stumble upon this chamber that is to teleport them to a certain observation area that is to possibly lead them to see a Earth of a different time period or distant future, a alternate Earth, a like a different planet that is to somehow have Earthlings on it, a possible side of the world that we are not aware that is to have been destroyed or in a war or something along those lines, because we don't know what this kind of Earth really is. And so you have to want to go on and compile all these thoughts and kind of put pieces together. And it just makes for a really interesting show. So, so I would say that this is actually a good show. Like, for me, like I am really just wanting to like have everything like figured out and whatever. I think a lot of people go on and like there might be a lot of people interested in this show, but I think that they might not exactly get sold right away on to the pilot episode, and then they'll just not have interest. I would say that the acting, like there's a lot about this show, or like the acting just sold me. It was just fun with the characters provided within these early episodes. So acting really sold me here. And then like the puzzle piecing, trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and this eventually just kind of snowballs into just like, okay, like these people just keep getting added, and I'm like, what? Like, wait a minute, who is this person? Who is that guy? Why are these girls going on and having to like possibly kill people? Like, there's so many weird, goofy things that end up getting played into the show. But yeah, so with that said, so teeing it up, what is this show for this pilot episode about? So we have it where Franklin and Irene are to eventually be dealing with their age, whether it's to start questioning whether they should go on and get some kind of assistance or to go into an old folks home, or to possibly figure out why Irene is in ill health the way that she is. and I mean ill health of just like she is to have trouble eating and having just kind of real like trouble. It seems with uh, possibly having like this just kind of turnaround, which we go and talk about in this first episode. So, and then things start to come into play. We have like a granddaughter, Denise, who ends up coming to this episode and is to start to question things about Franklin and Irene. We have Byron and Janine, who are either one, nosy neighbors, or two, uh, we have it to where Byron and Janine are possibly working against one another, question mark, as we further get into these episodes of just kind of going on and having Byron even questioning Janine at some points to like, can he trust her? He loves her, but can he trust her? So, but not only that, we have Irene in this first episode who's to see an old friend of hers, and then Franklin is to go on and eventually meet up with Denise, and so we're eventually going to see that at some point that characters are going to be forgetful in this episode, and that also really they're going to have to come to some hard questions also within this episode, also being very vague, but at the end of the day we will also have a stranger that comes into this first episode, which eventually I will name off who that is by the end of this episode, because that's when he arrives. So, anyways, and then after that, I might go on and talk about little bits and things that are to just kind of be like briefly showcased in this episode, and I'll go into them a little bit more, or I'll just talk about like certain other things in the next episode, I guess. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just double five this bad boy up. I might not go into every single specific thing about this episode because sometimes I will probably not go as very specific, but I'll try to do as best that I can for all the things that kind of go on in this episode. Because I'm like, man, there's a lot going on in one episode. Because I was thinking, I'm like, well, should I break it down as one episode? Should I do two? But then I was like, oh, like there's a lot always to break down in one of these kinds of episodes. So let's go on and let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time you get to spoil this episode. So this movie or this show starts very odd and is to give us a flashback to start off, which then we're like, wait a minute, what was that all about? So we have it where Franklin is at a bar and he is to be going and playing a thing of pool for $25, and it seems that he is on his last round. And so all of a sudden we have Irene with one of her friends making her way into this bar also. And so Franklin is to bounce this white ball into Irene's direction, and Irene is to stop it. So Franklin is to lose his bet with this pool table or billiard table, and is to make his way to Irene, where Irene is to say, like, you meant to smack this ball over here on purpose. And Franklin's like, well, how was I supposed to know that you were even over here? And so Irene and Franklin were to go on and meet one another, and that was to give us a glimpse of their first meeting, which was to have a very long, jevious relationship between the two of them. So now turn to several years later. So we have Franklin, we have Irene, and they're going and eating a sandwich. God damn, why can't you eat that sandwich? God, that was like the best thing about the one other like episode where Franklin just goes on, is like, "Can't you just eat that sandwich?" Oh man, that was like the pronouncing of it and the yelling of it. That was priceless. So, Franklin and Irene are to sit and eat a meal, and it seems that Irene is not interested in her meal, not because of Franklin uh, cooking things not so well, even though really he was to leave a thing of silverware in the microwave and nuke it. And so Franklin was to say, it's like, well, hey, maybe I should go on and get a newer model. And Irene's like, no, I think you'll be fine. Let's live dangerously. So they go on and have this meal, and then Franklin is to put too much salt, and Irene is to tell him about that. Like, hey, don't have too much salt. Franklin's like, well, wait, I thought you said that we're going to be living dangerously. Like, you can't go on and just backpedal. So all of a sudden, Irene is to not go on and eat her sandwich or her food. And so Franklin is to go on and say, like, well, hey, like, it doesn't really seem that you eat enough food to keep a bird alive. So, like, what's going on? Franklin more and more is just really concerned about Irene's health. And so whenever we get to have Franklin have Irene go to the doctor, or eventually have her doctor tell Franklin anything, there's to be this kind of big buildup of that to just be like, oh my god, like, what is wrong with her? Like, we need to know. Like, I just want to like be sure that she's okay, so we can keep kind of rolling with this duo, because it's just really fun. So after they go on and eat their sandwich or their meal or their whatever, we then go on to have the two of them that are to, hey, like, why don't we go out and look at the stars? So, funny enough, to the stars is the little wood piece thing that they kind of carved at some point within like the little thing of this tunnel that they go into, which I'll mention here in a second. So we have Franklin, we have Irene, and Irene is in this wheelchair, and Franklin is wheeling her to get to this shed. So this shed is to lead to have this opening, which leads them down the stairs, which leads them down to this tunnel, which leads them to this chamber, where again they had the like the to the stars sign. And so we have Irene, who is to give Franklin this little bucket thing, this little bowl thing. And Franklin's like, hey, no, I'm not gonna barf this time. And Irene's like, yeah, you will. And Franklin's like, no, I think I'll be fine. So both Franklin and Irene both teleport, and Franklin's like, wait, you know what? See, like, I think I'm. So Franklin goes on and goes into the bowl, and then accuses Irene of, like, well, he wouldn't have gone on and done it if she wouldn't have said anything. So we exit out of this teleported location to have them see some like observation deck of some room that is to have a window that is to see to a possibly number of different things: a alternative Earth, a futuristic Earth. Again, don't really know exactly what the answer legitimately is, or if they go on and explain this during any portion of other episodes. And so, really, that whole thought process is to go on and have you question things. So, after Irene and Franklin are to go on and have it where, like, both of them have been out here like hundreds upon hundreds of times. I think Franklin is to say over like 800 times. And so Franklin is finally telling Irene, it's like, well, hey, like, I can understand you've gone on and have kind of been contemplating like what we're really seeing here. Like, I can see your head like kind of churning like while we're not here. And Franklin is to realize that Irene is to want to go out here like all the time. And Franklin is to mention that at some point that all of the time that they have teleported here may take a toll, or that there might even be like, I'm not like, the show doesn't say this, but I want to wonder if there's going to be like a limitation for how many times they can really go on and do this. But who knows? So Franklin and Irene are to possibly have this conversation where they might be thinking that it may be time to give other people a chance. Maybe they should go on and tell Denise about this. And Franklin's like, well, I don't know. Like Denise could go on and just be worried like she always is. But so the more and more we get through other episodes, the more we'll go on and possibly showcase to people what this really is. And especially Byron. Byron's going to be this nosy neighbor that is to come to the fold and is to start to want to figure things out quickly. So, but we'll get to that. So, Franklin and Irene are to eventually go back into the house, and because Franklin is to want to go on and watch the game, he's kind of waiting up for Irene because she wants a couple more minutes. So eventually we have it where Franklin and Irene, Franklin is going to stay in Michael's room, and Irene is to go on and sleep in their room, because Franklin is having back problems and he'll eventually want to just kind of sleep in Michael's room. And so eventually Franklin is going to toss and turn in this bed and reveal a little carving thing that says Michael. So the explanation of Michael. Michael is both Irene and Franklin's son. And he is to have had his own room. And at some point or another, Michael was to die. And eventually within episodes, they'll talk about that a little bit more. But for reasons that I won't explain because pilot, something of what was to happen to Michael was to help both Franklin and Irene discover this whole chamber thing. And in other episodes, they'll explain that. Like, maybe not, like, directly, like, what happened to Michael, but, like, indirectly. Like, the grieving process of what was to happen to Michael, and having Irene, like, reflect on Michael passing away was to have both Franklin and Irene stumble upon the chamber by accident. Trying to be as vague for other episodes, but still. So, within the next day, we have it where Irene is to go on to the doctor, and Franklin was talking to Irene before they were to go into the chamber, and Franklin was to need to go and get light bulbs, was to go on and get ice cream, and so it seems very bizarre to me that Franklin was to have a large number of ice cream, and it seems like he was never worried that any of that ice cream would melt inside of his car. Because by the time that he goes on and is to have all that ice cream be at his house, like he never was to worry about it melting, it just seems very bizarre. But so we go on to the grocery store, or we go on and have Franklin, who is delivering Irene uh, to this doctor, to this doctor, and Irene is telling Franklin that he should go on and maybe visit Randy's, so maybe Franklin can get drunk. And Franklin's like, well, no, like I don't think I can do that anymore, because one beer gets me sleepy. So, but we're just kind of reflecting on our past. So we go on and have Irene go to this doctor visit, and so we have this doctor talking about Irene should be in like much better health than she is, and it seems that like Irene might be dealing with something more than just uh, like the symptoms, that there might be some depression there, possibly from still dealing with the loss of Michael, or some possible depression because of her fall. So, and plus, like Irene is not eating. So, just you know, so Franklin is to go to the grocery store and is to buy light bulbs and ice cream and all the stuff that I just mentioned. And uh, and at some point he was also supposed to get gas. Eventually, though, that'll be a problem. So all of a sudden, while Franklin is getting checked out at this grocery store, all of a sudden his phone rings and Denise is in town, stating that, like, hey, she's pulling in right now to want to go on and, of course, speak with Irene and Franklin. So, within this discussion between Franklin and Denise, we had it at one point where Franklin and Irene were to make their way to their shed in the middle of the night. We have Byron, who's to be this nosy neighbor, and so Byron was to go on and be walking his dog and noticing that this two couple were to, of course, be walking late at night in their own yard, house, whatever. And so Byron was just very suspicious about that. And I'll talk about that in the conversation between both Denise and both Franklin. So Franklin is to go on and meet Denise at this restaurant. And so uh, we have it where Denise is fiddling with this napkin. Come to find out, Denise is in college right now, but I think she is to be very distracted with her college things, to where I think she's much more concerned about anything other than going to school. To the point where I believe she eventually like is to just be not at the right headspace to go on and do college at some point. So, but eventually that'll lead to that in the show. It's not a big mystery. So Denise is to go on and talk to Franklin about both Franklin and Irene, and how like she is kind of worried about Irene because she fell once. And Franklin is like, well, yeah, but like she's doing good. She's doing good right now. Like what else do you got? Like what other problems? And so Denise is just like, well, like, don't you think it's time that you guys should go on and just like kind of move on and go to uh like kind of move out of your place and go on uh and eventually do other and Franklin's like, no, like I think we're doing fine right now. So Denise is to go on and talk about how Byron and Janine, who are their neighbors, was to have found Denise on a social media. I think it was like Facebook or something somewhere. And so they found her, and so they messaged her that both Franklin and Irene were going out at night, just kind of going out. And Franklin's like, "What? Like it was just going out to the back of our shed. So what?" And Denise is just like, "Well, doesn't that seem kind of just strange?" And Franklin's like, "No, we do that all the time. Like, I don't get what you're so." For this dialogue, we just have Franklin that is just kind of frazzled and just kind of very just upset. So after Franklin is done talking with Denise, he is to make his way back home. And then it dawns on him that he is to completely forget that Irene is to eventually not be home as he's calling for her. And he's like, oh crap. So while Irene is waiting for her husband, uh, we have it to her after Irene is done talking to her doctor, and the doctor is to tell Irene, it's like, well, hey, like, we don't want you disappearing. And Irene's like, no, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So, yeah, that's definitely not going to happen anytime soon. So, Irene, it seems, is to try and call Franklin, and she is just getting it straight to uh, like voicemail. So Irene's like, okay, like this is taking a while. So all right, Irene decides to go on and is to see this kind of this clerk that's behind this desk that's at this doctor's office. And so Irene is to say, it's like, well, hey, if my husband arrives, just tell him I went to go see an old friend. So because Irene is to see nearby that there is this Golden Bow nursing home, and so Irene is to make her way there. Where all of a sudden, one of the nurses is to possibly confuse her with some gal named Miss Boyle, and we have a girl called Chandra that is to correct her and say, like, hey, like, this woman does not live here, obviously, and is to say that this is actually Mrs. York. So, like, going on and saying, and correcting her. So, Chandra, not really quite sure about this one. Really, not exactly the most savory character, but either way, when really looking at it, like, I guess, like, she's probably being very honest about things, but still. So, Chandra is to go on and is to take Irene to a woman named Sadie. So we have it to where Chandra the whole time is to talk about how certain members of the elderly and whatever are to go on and be ungrateful or to be this or to be that. And I'm just like, man, I don't need to hear any of this. I don't like I don't want to like hear the woes and the whatevers of like no, not so much. So, but so Shanra is to take Irene to Sadie's room. So we have Irene making her way into Sadie's place, and like at first we end up seeing this empty bed, and I'm like, oh my god, like is Sadie dead? That's what I was thinking, like coming into my brain. But then come to find out it's just in another room, and I'm like, oh yeah. So Irene goes and meets or re-meets up with Sadie after it's been who knows how long. And so we have Sadie who is to mention about like, hey, are you here to go on and fix my window? And Irene's like, no, like I'm an old friend of yours. Like, don't you remember me? It's Irene. And so eventually we have Sadie, who talks about George and that he had passed away, and that she is to also go on and remember Irene, and that she used to have so many things of ribbon in her hair, and she used to work with her, and that she used to have this certain shop that she owned. And then all of a sudden we have it again, where Sadie is to mention, like, well, hey, like, are you here to fix my window? And Irene is like, no, like I'm an old friend of yours. I'm Irene. Like, I heard about George's passing, and I'm so sorry about that. And so, come to find out, Irene is to kind of get the fact that Sadie is to go on and like have some memory loss, and just like go on and like, yeah, I really just wanted to like kind of just catch up and see how you are. So Sadie, after the second, or after the first kind of approach of things, all of a sudden Sadie is now to mention that Irene like wasn't a good worker when she worked with her before at that place, and how she thought that she was so smart, and and all of this stuff that is just kind of horrible. And it's like, well, hey, I made my trek all the way out here to see you. So, but yeah, so we have it where again Sadie is to give the rotation about the whole shop, and so again she's like, well, hey, are you here to fix my window? And I'm like, man, this has just got to be like so just sad. So Irene, after going on and making her way back to this doctor's appointment, by then Franklin is to remember that where exactly Irene had been dropped off from. So Franklin is to go with that and pick up Irene, and so I'm sure Franklin is to just go on and just kind of apologize and all these things. So Franklin is to mention that the reason why he was so distracted is because Denise was in town, and so they go on and they talk about how Denise is possibly thinking that at some point these guys should go on and probably move to possibly an assistance home or something like that, or that they should just move. And Irene is like, well, Franklin, like, should we move? Like, do you think that we should? And Franklin's going on to like, well, no. So all of a sudden Franklin is to realize, while they're talking about all of this happening and stuff like that, all of a sudden Franklin is to realize that they ran out of gas. So Franklin is to be very upset, because he's like, seriously, the one thing that I was supposed to remember was gas, and that's the one thing that he forgot about. So we have AAA guy who's to go on and give them gas, and Franklin is asking this AAA guy, it's like, well, hey, like, you weren't gonna go on and like report this, are you? The guy's like, no, man, it's gas. Like, hey, man, just kind of remember it next time. So we have Franklin, we have Irene, who make it all the way back home, and we have Franklin and Irene and going back onto this conversation of Franklin saying like, well, like, you know what, the whole conversation about this, like, well, like, how long do you think that we're really going to live? Till like 100? Because like, I want those years. Like, I want like those years with you. And so, because Irene is to mention, like, if she dies first, then maybe Franklin should eventually kind of move away from here and go on and just kind of like just do whatever he wants after this. And Franklin's like, well, like, what would, like, what would be a good time to just kind of move out? Like, what would be like a good number if you die to just move? So we go on and have them kind of contemplating everything. And so uh but after the end of this, they both start to have like a lot of fun with one another. We have Franklin, who is to start to massage Irene's feet, and Irene is to get fairly ticklish, and Franklin and Irene are to go to try to use the stair lift thing, and they're going to use it together. And so it seems that at some point the machine ends up breaking down, and so Franklin is to have to manually lift up Irene into bed. And so they both go on and they sleep together, and we have Franklin, who of course is to mutter some song that that I guess he had heard at some point. So Franklin and Irene, so they're both sleeping, it seems, but Irene is to go on and just be curious about that observation deck and want to go on to make it to the outside of this observation deck. So we have Irene, who is to write out this whole note to Franklin, uh, mentioning that, like, she just wants to go out there and see for herself about this world. And at some point later on, we have Franklin and Byron, who come up with like a or technically Franklin comes up with it, but then Byron is to assist him. But still, Franklin is to come up with some kind of suit, weirdly, that could possibly go on and possibly be like an astronaut adjacent kind of suit for them to go out there and possibly deal with the atmosphere outside of there. But eventually we'll get to that in a second here, or we'll get to that eventually somewhere down the road. So Irene is to go on and write this note to Franklin, and then is to go and be teleported to that observation deck, to then want to go on and go through the door to make it outside to see if she can breathe or not. And Franklin was to mention Irene that they probably should not go through this door because they had sent some animals out there and they had died. So Irene is to want to go through this door, but all of a sudden instead she is to see a man that is to be struggling, and he is to be inside this room with her. So we find out that this guy is actually, his name is going to be Jude, and Franklin and Irene are going to be taking care of him to hope that he gets better, because right now he is very sick. And so we have Jude, who ends up getting put into Michael's room, and eventually Franklin and Irene are to bring up Michael to Jude, and they mention what had happened to Michael. And so we go on and we have it where Franklin is to start to ask Jude a bunch of questions. And we really have at some points where Jude is to consistently write it off as he doesn't remember consistently. So we have so many questions and not a lot of answers within the show, but that's just the way things are. So with that said, I hope that covers most of this episode. I think I'm going to go out of my way to get out of here because I feel like most of this episode was technically covered. Uh, Besides that, we also had uh, while Irene and Franklin were to have gone on and drove to Irene's doctor's appointment, all of a sudden they bump into Byron, who is going on and cutting not only his grass but then theirs. So we have Franklin that's kind of upset by Byron cutting his grass, and is to say that technically Byron is trespassing and all this stuff because Franklin, for some odd reason, just does not like Byron. There's just something about him he just doesn't like. He just is rubbed the wrong way by this guy. So we have Byron that is asking Franklin. It's like, well, hey, like, since we're such good neighbors, maybe at some point we'll like exchange tools. Maybe you can borrow me that planer that you have. And Franklin's saying like, well, nope, sorry, like the planer's broken. And so Byron is like, okay, all right, well, like I guess this isn't going to work out between both of them. So we have it where Byron is to make his way back to Janice's place. So I'm basically skipping, like I skipped all of the like Byron Janice stuff, and I'll cover that now. So we have Byron who is to make his way back home, and he is to have Janice there. So we immediately have Byron that is talking to Janice and kind of replaying what had happened with Franklin. And so Byron is to mention that it doesn't make sense that Franklin is to say that the planner is broken because there is a fresh plain thing of wood. So Franklin had somehow or another lied. Like as if they're trying to keep something from that shed away from other people. Excuse me. And so Byron wants to kind of figure that out. So we also had a moment where Byron was to go on and was to contemplate to Janice about him possibly going on and being a town councilman. And so he at first was to go on and put his last name on these vote signs. And Janice was to say, like, well, how about you just say vote Byron? That seems very easy and simple. And Byron's like, yeah, that sounds great. That sounds really good. So we have it to where Janice is to ask Byron. It's like, well, hey, like, why are you interested in being like town council? And Byron's like, well, hey, like when we were in Champaign from before, like I felt that I could never really go on and do that, but I think here there's a possibility that I can be anybody. I could be town councilman. And Janine is like, well, that's great and all, but you know, because it seems that for bizarrely some reason or another, Janine is probably going to try somehow or another to kill that dream of Byron possibly accomplishing or being anything but what he has already been. So, and that happens in other episodes. So, we have it at one point where Byron is to try to very much be a nosy neighbor, and so we're just going to have it where Byron is to possibly quickly stumble upon what really Franklin and Irene are doing, and eventually that'll lead to uh, Byron going on and putting the pieces together and so on and so forth. I think there's like another scene with Byron possibly doing something, but heaven forbid I know exactly what that exactly is. But anyways, so I think that all covers this whole episode for the most point. Other than that, let me know in the comments below if there was anything that I forgot about for this pilot episode. Yeah, like I like to just go on and just instead of covering everything, every single thing like the episode, I like to just go on and just focus on certain things and then kind of cover anything else, which would be kind of like side pieces or like I like to tell one whole like story instead of going on and telling like separate bits and ditties and whatever. So, anyways, yeah. So with that said, I think that's the episode. I think that's it. So I'm going to get out of here. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Night Sky. If you were to go on and watch it afterwards of seeing my review or opinion about it. Or maybe you were to go on and say, nah, didn't really like the show, thought it was garbage. Then that's okay too. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to say I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.